More information has emerged about North Koreans' failed attacks in the Kursk region this week. According to several Ukrainian drone pilots, the North Koreans didn't appear to understand that the drones were weapons. Just what do I think really happened? And what does this mean for the future of North Korean assistance to the Russian war machine? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. First, before we get into it, I wanted to say that hit that subscribe button. That really makes a difference for me. It tells the YouTube algorithm that the content I'm making is good. And as always, you may notice a dip in quality. It's because I'm on the road for the holidays. So I'm recording on kind of a simpler setup than usual. Okay, so this is the story that was originally reported by the Washington Post that North Korean troops don't seem to realize that the drones are actually deadly. And this is something that echoes actually what I said. If you remember at Combat Vet News, we took a look at some of the drone footage emerging from North Korea, or from Kursk, of North Korean troops. And while I can't show you the footage, in that video I talked extensively about the fact that North Korea's tactics didn't make any sense for a drone-based environment. And it wasn't just me that had this assessment. According to Ukrainian drone pilots, it was almost frighteningly easy to take these North Koreans out. He said, one drone commander said, quote, "We were very surprised. We had never seen anything like it. 40 to 50 people running across a field," one drone commander said. He continued, "FPV drones, artillery, and other weapons struck them because they were moving in an open field," he said. "You can imagine the result." Another drone operator, Artem, said that instead of running away from the drones, North Korean troops shot at them indiscriminately, while others just kept running. Right? During a nighttime operation, Artem said he saw 3 soldiers based on their heat signatures on a thermal camera, assuming he would only get to take out one of them. But when the other 2 failed to react, he was able to hit all 3 at once. He described the experience as bizarre, adding, quote, "It was like the first time I felt like playing a computer simulator on easy mode." Right? Now, this is really interesting for a couple of reasons. And before we talk about it, I did want to mention that one of the reasons I'm able to cover these sorts of stories independently is because you guys have my back, right? Over on combatvetnews.com. This is my version of Patreon, where I twice a week do a deep dive breakdown of the combat footage coming to us from the front lines, including in a lot of instances, combat footage sent to me from units that I linked up with when I was in Ukraine. So if you're interested in that and supporting the channel, go check it out over on combatvetnews.com. The link is, as always, in the description. Okay, so here's what I wanted to talk about with these North Korean troops, is having reviewed at least all of the footage that's currently publicly available, they're right. I was also confused watching this footage. North Korean soldiers were attacking in what were approximately platoon-sized elements, 40 to 50 soldiers. And they were crossing in open fields in a straight line in wintertime, wearing dark brown and green camo, standard kind of Russian issue camo. And so what happened is, of course, that you had a giant open white field, you had little dark green dots running across it in a little line like ants. To even the most amateurish reconnaissance drone operator, it's clear that this is an attack. And you could see the FPV drones simply picking these soldiers off. As you can imagine, these soldiers, the North Koreans, caught in an open field, have very few options to defend against these drones, right? And while many of them did appear to recognize that the drones were dangerous, several of them did appear to do the right things, which of course is get to some kind of overhead cover, particularly tree lines or thick scrub. Anything like that is going to interfere with the drone's ability to conduct a final attack. And we saw this when I was in Ukraine, right? When we were evading a Russian drone, our military escort took us through towns that had intact power lines strung across the top of the road, and that would interfere with the drone's ability to conduct that final attack run. So The North Koreans, some of them seem to know this. But the question is why, right? Russian tactics, we know, are very different right now. They operate in small groups of 3 to 4. They push across in a very dispersed fashion, meaning that just because you've spotted a single group of 3 doesn't mean that you've spotted the attack. The attack is broad-based and sort of pushes gradually across the front line. And it's done so under the aid of drone reconnaissance. And drone reconnaissance is always watching, not so much to make sure that those 3 to 4 man Russian groups remain protected, but they want to see, because some of those 3 to 4 man teams will get to a Ukrainian position, and those Ukrainians will engage that Russian fire team. Once they do so, the reconnaissance drone spots them and directs artillery, mortars, and FPVs to take out that Ukrainian position. And so the fact is that the opposite is that when you have a 40-man assault element, right, operating, again, conducting a single unit movement, that is a huge liability, right? That's how cluster munitions are classic. There was video of a cluster munition hitting this large bunch of North Koreans all gathered together. You also, of course, have a situation where FPV drones can swarm, because once you hit one person in a platoon, what do? Well, they're going to recover their battle buddy. They're going to stop their movement. They're going to have a medic treat them. They're going to triage them. They're going to have to start treating them. You freeze the whole platoon in place. Then what happens? Well, now you've bought time for more FPVs to swarm. Now you've bought time for mortars to get dialed in on the location. Now you've bought time for artillery to dial into the location. Would FPV drones or would artillery or mortars become involved at all if you took out one person of a 3-man fire team? No, it wouldn't be worth it. And the fire team would likely scatter. The remaining 2 people would likely scatter. And so, the Russians have evolved these tactics the hardest way. Literally, they sacrificed, I think the current casualty numbers are around 200,000 Russians dead in order to find that this is the best way to achieve Russia's tactical objectives, right? And it still comes at a massive cost, but it's a massive cost that allows objectives to be achieved. Because there's never a concentration of troops for weapon systems to target. But what do I think happened? Well, I think the North Koreans, remember, North Koreans are trained, they're in shape, they're motivated, they have a strong command structure. They likely, I suspect, well, one, they may have simply not been properly warned or briefed by Russian commanders. But what I think is more likely is that the North Koreans, remember, these are elite forces, but in dictatorships and communist countries, elite means they're elite in their loyalty to North Korea, right? That is what defines their eliteness, much like the Iraqi Republican Guard or the Chechen Kadyrovitsky. Those folks are loyal to their leader. That is their primary trait. And in exchange for their loyalty, they're provided with better quality gear, perhaps better quality training at some level, but they are not actually better soldiers. They may be, but only by accident. And so when you have these kind of people who believe the North Korean military lines, they actually believe that they are elite level soldiers. Now imagine how they likely perceive the Russian military in its current state. We know that the professional Russian military has largely been destroyed, and that the reserve army, for lack of a better term, that Russia conjured up was destroyed in 2023. So now Russia relies on aging conscripts, old men, drunks, criminals, and the North Koreans likely saw these guys, and they saw their small 4-man attack elements, they saw their high casualty rate, and the North Koreans went, this doesn't make any sense. You have to fight as a platoon. You have to fight as a unit. You have to get together and use your firepower, fire and maneuver, all the things that are true in a conventional war of the past, in a pre-drone era war. And the problem is the North Koreans incorrectly discerned what happened. They looked at the Russians. They said, these guys are idiots. These guys are drunks. They have these bizarre tactics that, according to at least all the books that we study, that the North Korean military tells us are good tactics. According to those, these are terrible tactics and should never work and are pointlessly and are almost the opposite of what a good military strategy would be. And the North Koreans probably said, or at least their commander said, we're too good for this. These shitty tactics may work for a group of drunks and old men and uneducated Russian peasants, but we're the elite of the elite North Koreans. We are highly motivated, highly focused, and highly capable. We do not need to follow these tactics. But they misread the situation, and in my theory, is that they didn't realize that the reason these tactics were being implemented is because the highly motivated, highly trained, large formation assaults were all exterminated, and all that were left was this army of drunk old men. And so the North Koreans just could not conceive of a fundamental change in the nature of warfare. And trust me, the U.S. military is not above this. Despite having not fought against a peer adversary in we'll be generous and say 20 years, but the real number is more like 30. Excuse me. The fact is the U.S. military never misses an opportunity to patronizingly tell other militaries how to fight and win wars, despite having not won one of their own in, again, several decades. And that's kind of, I think, what led to partially the failure of the Ukrainian counteroffensive when simply U.S. military doctrine just never accounted for absolutely pervasive drones, pervasive mining, and a lack of air power, a lack of air dominance. And so, again, this is something that you need in a military. You need to believe you're the best, right? Like, would you really want to go into combat believing that your enemy is superior in motivation, in tactics, in technology? No, you have to believe that you have some sort of special sauce that make you unstoppable, right? And so you're someone like North Korea whose loyalty, a loyal military, is the most important thing in that country because it's the only other power, it's the only power center of that country. These guys likely believed that they were simply too elite to have to listen to those dumb Russians. And that ended up being their downfall. They're going to have to take the lessons of the Russian military. They're going to have to humble themselves and say, wow, I think we had been preparing for the wrong war. But this is extra hard because remember, here in the United States, we can criticize our leadership. We can say, listen, the armies, I can sit there and post this on YouTube and say, I think that the Pentagon is totally misdirected on the future of war. I think we are ill prepared for the wars of the future, and nothing's going to happen to me, right? But try saying that in the North Korean military. Try saying that God Emperor Kim Jong-un has not prepared their military adequately, has missed the development of drones, has not trained us with any of the equipment or any of the tactics of a true modern war, and is living in the past. That is a one-way ticket to a North Korean re-education camp. So you almost, under that system, there was no chance these troops were ever going to get that training, and the battlefield realities are only going to penetrate the officers' heads if they see it and experience it for themselves. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. A huge thank you to the Colonel tier members of CombatVetNews.com. This channel is only possible through you guys, particularly folks like Bill Collier, Robert Colburn, guys, Martin, Eugene, Cressy, Chris Gorsuch, Francis Karius, AL90, Petch, all of our Lieutenant tier members. Couldn't do it without you guys. I appreciate you so much. Hit that subscribe button. Makes a difference, and I will see all you guys in the next one. Cheers.